Welcome to Synthetic Minds, the podcast where the boundaries between science fiction and technological reality blur, offering insights that help organizations navigate the future. Here, we engage with leading thinkers and writers to unpack the narratives that could shape our world. As your host, Dr. Mark van Remenam, accompanied by my digital twin, I invite you to explore with us the intricate dance between the natural and the artificial, to question what it means to be human in a world brimming with technological marvels. Our discussions aim to harness the power of future thinking, a crucial skill set in these rapidly changing times, drawing lessons from those who dare to dream about what lies ahead. Today, I am joined by the esteemed T.R. Napper, whose unique background in diplomacy and humanitarian work across Southeast Asia infuses his award-winning cyberpunk narratives with a profound understanding of geopolitical dynamics and human resilience. In this episode, we delve deep into the intertwining of real-world experiences with speculative fiction, exploring how Napper's journey from a diplomatic career to a celebrated science fiction author impacts his views on technology and society. Through his novels, like the acclaimed 36 Streets, Napper offers us a window into the possible futures shaped by today's technological choices. Napper's narratives not only captivate but also provoke thought about our technological trajectory and its impact on human values and societal structure. Don't forget to like and subscribe to be informed when future episodes become available. Join us on this enlightening journey where we seek to understand the future by examining the thought-provoking narratives and insights provided by Tim Napper. So welcome, Tim, to the show. I'm very excited to have you here on the show and to discuss your books and to discuss sort of the future of organizations.
A pleasure. I don't know how good my predictions will be, but...
Well, we'll see how we go. So maybe before we dive into some of the questions I have for you, can you share a bit about the background and some of the books that you've written and the one or two books that you're most proud of?
My background. So before I came to writing a little bit later than most of my peers. I didn't start writing fiction until I was in my 30s. I had lots of jobs, but I was an aid worker for about a decade. So I was at a diplomat as well, living in different parts of Southeast Asia, running poverty alleviation programs. So I lived in Laos. For 3 years, I lived in Vietnam. I spent a lot of time in Myanmar, Indonesia, all through the region. But it was in Vietnam. My partner and I lived there for 3 years. And our son was 12 months old at the time. And we had kind of a deal, like my wife accompanied me to the previous posting. And then so the next one, I'm like, I'll support you and I'll be the primary carer. But that was like the first time in my life I probably wasn't working full time, since I was 18 or whatever. So, and I'd been thinking about writing, and I dabbled a little bit, but I threw myself into it for 3 years. And with the kind of, I had a deal with myself where if after 3 years, if I suck, that's it. But after 3 years, if I'm getting somewhere, well, we'll see what's happening. And I had a few I started with short stories. I'm a novelist now. I still write short stories sometimes, but I started with short stories. And I was cursed with some early success, so I stuck with it. But as we mentioned briefly before we came on air, writing for me has become something almost a sickness. Like if I don't write, I don't feel good. I'm not myself. So now it has become something that I need to do, but also something that's enormously rewarding. And the second part of your question was the book I'm most proud of. Well, I have a collection out. I have my debut out. I have a couple more novels. I've got 2 books due out this year. But I suppose my debut, it's my debut novel, 36 Streets. In fact, coincidentally, I have a framed picture. That was my debut, and I wrote that. And the 36 Streets is another name for the old quarter in Hanoi. The 36 Streets representing the 36 guilds. So it's a cyberpunk, near-future science fiction, year 2100. America has collapsed. China is the sole superpower. What does the world look like? And that, I took a long time to write that book. I probably took, between starting it and publication, might have been 7 years. and I lost an agent over it. This is why I'm proud. This is why I'm proud of it, because I lost an agent over it, and everyone rejected it. And everyone, and the very last publisher we submitted it to, and it was the last one on the list. There was none left. Accepted it, and then of course it went on to win a whole bunch of awards and get critical acclaim, and just showed me how fine the line is between success and failure in the publishing industry. Like a book that no one wanted suddenly became, it's not huge or anything, but it became a very well-regarded cyberpunk novel. In fact, I wrote the book also as part of I did a creative writing doctorate. So when I changed careers from aid to becoming a writer, I did a creative writing doctorate. And in Australia, it doesn't happen in every country, but in Australia you can do a creative work as part of your thesis. So I did a long essay, but then the book I wrote as well. So it was part of my doctorate. So in terms of what I'm most proud of, it'd be that, because it gave me, it's my first book, it won awards, no one wanted it, and I got a doctor in front of my name. So yeah, I'd have to say that.
I've done my I have my PhD as well, and I remember how much work it is to write a dissertation and to write a book and to do all that work. So kudos to that. So I can imagine that you're proud of that. So you mentioned that 36th Street is a cyberpunk novel. What is sort of the common themes in your books from a technology perspective? Are they all cyberpunk, or do you cover different?
At the moment, I am. In the future, I'm planning on writing else. In another genre, but so far it's all cyberpunk, and it's all set in the same universe I've created. So I've got, let me think. I did write one tie-in novel, but that's separate. I did write for the Aliens universe, and conveniently, that's the book over here on the screen. But that's quite different. So I don't think of that in quite the same way, because it's someone else's intellectual property. No, I think once you've built a world, and that is an incredibly time-consuming process for a writer, you want to spend some time in it, and you want to add more layers. So I did a short story collection, and the novel, and the other books coming out, all set in the same world. So it's all the time periods range, but it is set about the year 2100. Why cyberpunk? Cyberpunk's, well, not why cyberpunk, but what is the technological aspects? Cyberpunk thematically is very skeptical of tech, and not skeptical in the sense that tech is bad. We're not Luddites. Some people might say we are, but that's not at all true. Cyberpunk rather looks at the way technology is used to subjugate, to oppress, to surveil people, to accumulate power into very few hands. Cyberpunk in general is looking and it likes, I think it's fair to say, one of the themes is how to remain human in an inhumane society, how to keep a spark of rebellion alive in a system that demands subservience. So from the technological perspective, I'm fascinated by it. I do a lot of reading, but it's usually exploring the ways that can use to exploit us and dehumanize. When, of course, technologies that I write about could be used for the common good, absolutely. But that's in that sort of imagined future. That's not normally the case. So the relationship with technology in cyberpunk and in my work is not a positive one. And it's, in a way, I'll try and be brief, but there was a movement in science fiction in the 50s, 60s, to some extent the 70s, that was very positive. All progress is good. Technology is fantastic. And cyberpunk is one of those subgenres that came out in the 80s, 90s that pushed back a bit and said, wait a minute, progress isn't always good. Technological change isn't always for everyone's benefit. Let's have a look at it. So I think that's the genre, and that's certainly where I come from in my books.
Nice. And so in 36 Streets, the main character is sort of capable of moving through the physical and the digital world. augmented reality, mixed reality, the metaverse obviously has been quite a hype in the past couple of years. So from your explorations into this future, into 2100, as you mentioned, which technologies do you envision to become reality of the ones that you have envisioned next decade or so?
In the next decade or so, I think for me, I like what Ursula Le Guin said about this being predictive. She said science fiction, in her opinion, isn't predictive, it's descriptive. So if I had to answer that question, I look at what's happening now. And I think in thinking about the future, I say, well, what are the trends now? What are the tech now? And which ones will I think will still be there in the future and expanding and becoming more influential? So it's more a question of looking at our world now and then what will be more prominent in 10 years. So 10 years from now, I think surveillance, if we think surveillance is bad now, it will be amazing in 10 more years. I think unfortunately, tech, I think communication technologies should and could be used to bring people together and communities together over time and space. But what we see in the current environment, which I suspect we'll continue to see in the future, is societies, in part because of tech, because of social media, more atomized. Politics will be more fractured, and the capacity to, as I'm sure you've talked about it on this show, but personal data is the new gold rush. It's the new gold rush because it can change the way we behave, and it can predict our behavior. I think companies are going to get better at that. I think on the positive side, renewable technology is going to be amazing in 10 years. It's always, I remember 10 years ago, it would have been 10 years ago. I remember people saying renewable technology hasn't got the capacity to replace fossil fuels ever. It's impossible. And look at it now. It's become more and more efficient and cheaper all the time. So, and I have that in my world. I do imagine it's a bleak world, but the renewable tech is ubiquitous, and I do think it'll become more and more so.
But I think that's sort of the common problem, that we overestimate the short term and we underestimate the long term. That we it's very difficult for people to extrapolate their thinking of what is today to envision the future of tomorrow. Which I think that's why one of the reasons why I'm interviewing science fiction writers, because I think you are you're very capable of doing that by creating the books. You sort of have created the art of imagining the impossible and to extrapolate the current day's technology to a far future and then start to envision what that means. What's your trick? How do you do that?
Oh, what's my trick? Oh, well, I don't think I've been asked that question before. What's the trick? Well, I think it's partly what I said. I'm very engaged in current events. And of course, my previous expertise was in, and current really, is in geopolitics. So I understand geopolitics very well, and I think I have a good sense of what the geopolitical future would look like. In terms of the tech, some of it is just stuff that's obvious. I think the renewable one is a pretty easy bet to make on what the future will look like. And I think if you look at the changes between the last 10 years and now, I was thinking about this before this interview. What's changed in the last 10 years most significantly? I don't know if there's been any massive revolutions except in refining the collection of data, refining surveillance, and I think psychological warfare, which is part of my work, is really quite sophisticated these days, and there's many mechanisms to deliver it. So I'm not answering your question. My answer is that I'm looking at. I do think about the last where we've come in X amount of time, and some of it's this. Things will look the same, and some of that will be completely alien to us, and that's why part of the reason I said it in my book in the Old Quarter in Hanoi is that's a place in Vietnam where parts of that Old Quarter have not changed in thousands of years. Yeah. but it's side by side. It's high tech, low life, which is what cyberpunk is about. So how do I do it? So yeah, it's being interested in current politics. It's reading about, I'm not my background isn't a scientific background, but I read about tech and where it's going. I'm also very skeptical about a lot of the claims because there's all these big claims happen all the time. Metaverse was one. What happened to the metaverse?
I'm convinced it will come. I think this is one of the problems of overestimating the short term. I mean, what I've noticed as being a futurist for over 12 years now is that it always takes longer. So we're going through the hype cycle, and I remember 10, 12 years ago was the hype cycle was big data, and everyone thought big data is the new gold and the new oil, which it is now, but it wasn't 10 years ago. And then we had blockchain in 2017, and everyone thought, oh, blockchain is the new fundamental of how we run a society, and that didn't happen yet. And then we had the metaverse, and now we have AI. So I think it's sort of a continuous way that we go through this hype cycle, and we are as a humanity, we are very excited about the new technology that's going to change everything. But the reality is that change is difficult and change takes time, and I think often people forget that.
And I think one of the things that I think about is systems as well. What type of system we have a free market economy. We have democracies and dictatorships in the world, but how do each of them adapt to tech? And what are their motivations? What does the most influential tech barons, what do they want to happen with tech? What does Musk? What does Zuckerberg? What does Google? What do they want to happen? Now, they're pretty influential people. If they want something to happen, they might. Now, they do. There is opposing forces. There are governments and so forth. Governments are very slow and cumbersome, though. So that's another thing. So I do think about, whenever I read about a new tech, my mind, it's almost like an instinct, immediately leaps to what are the human consequences. Because someone will be saying, oh, it's this new tech and it's a robot dog and the robot dog can be your companion. And my brain will go, they're going to put a gun in the robot dog and then they're going to put it on the battlefield. And then like a few years later, I'll see an image of that robot dog with a gun strapped to it and the military trying it out. So if you think about this is a terrible way to predict the future, but I always think the worst thing someone could do with a tech, and I'm normally right, they don't necessarily succeed, but they will try it. So it's one of them is the human consequences of change. Who that affects, it affects different parts of society in different ways. So that's certainly something I'm always almost on instinct just thinking about. Yeah.
Yeah. So is it sort of your intuition that you see a technology, you're able to see how it will converge with other technologies, and then you're able to extrapolate from that, and is that sort of how you navigate the uncertainty of the future? Is that sort of correct?
Yep, that's absolutely an aspect. I think sometimes it's good to look at history too, and to think about cycles in history and how cultures adapt to certain things as well. I think about that, like for example, the way China might use surveillance tech in general is extremely different to how America uses it. You'd think, oh, but it's surveillance tech. Isn't that the same thing? No. It's used in very different ways. And that's a cultural and political aspect. So I think that's part of it as well.
We live in fast-changing times. There's almost on a daily basis there's something new in the news. When it comes in this case about artificial intelligence, there's a new large language model. There's another prediction that artificial general intelligence will arrive by 2025. How should organizations navigate this disruption, this rapid change? And because I believe we're going through sort of a phase transition as a society, sort of a digital renaissance that doesn't take 100 years like the first renaissance, but that happens in like 2 or 3 or 5 years. What, from your experience as a science fiction writer, what can organizations do to prepare for that and to embrace this change and to see the future that might be fundamentally different 10 years from now than it is today? How can they prepare for that?
I think the first thing is it depends on the organization, but for whomever they are, I would be wary of the hype. That would be the first thing. I've seen a lot of absurd takes on AI, magic wand, all disease cured, all movies made, personalized, said shot into your brain. Like, it's just nonsense. These nonsense takes on AI. And people love to imagine technology like the hand of God, like it's divine providence and inevitable. And what I think my argument would be, there's still people in the equation. We haven't been taken out of it yet. So for organizations, I'd say, you don't know what governments are going to do in the future, or what legislation is going to do in the future, what wars they're going to be. You can make predictions on these things, how populations are going to react to certain types of technology, when they might say enough is enough. You don't know. You can't even being like us, when we're thinking about the future all the time, you can't predict everything that's going to happen. So if you're an organization, I would say have really good people who can think critically and are flexible and are committed to whatever your organization is. The capacity to be critical thought is a sadly underrated quality that is so useful no matter the organization. You don't want drones. We can probably make them at some point. You want people, if you're in an organization, you want your people to be good and to be able to react and adapt. And they're something that you can control. You can't control a lot of external forces, but you can control the people that are working in your, control, but you can choose the people that are working in your organization and encourage certain cultures and ways of behaving.
But when you say that encouraging certain behavior is, I think, is of course, you want to steer your organization in a certain direction, but having an open mind and having the perspectives of a science fiction writer that can show you a different future of a future where we might or might not be heading to. Is there a role to play for science fiction writers within organizations to advise them, give them?
Yes, there is, and someone should hire me immediately. After Wednesday, listen to this. Look, I do. These are I think that not all of us, but some science fiction writers are very serious thinkers. I'm not talking about myself, but just in general, are serious thinkers and serious philosophers of technology in the future, and have thought very deeply. And thought, one of the things we do, I think, which you don't see very often, is something that I mentioned before, is think about the human consequences and the social consequences. New texts are proposed all the time, and people can only see the good, the most optimal solution. But culture and society and human beings are complex. And understanding the ripple effect within a society is, I find, a strangely rare ability. And I think science fiction writers, one of the great things about science fiction is every now and again you just read someone who blows your mind, who thinks about something in a brand new way, thinks of a way of managing a problem, or constructing a society, or whatever it might be, who's engaging in thought experiments. And so these people are thinking of the world in a way, through a social lens, through a human lens, but also in a way that it's explicable. Because if there's a report is one thing, and a dry statistical data is another. But when you put a human being in a story and they're walking through the world, clicks. And then you can have people going, "Oh my God!" and this is the consequences of this, and this is what society will be like. And so. I think science fiction writers can, as I said, they're not. I don't think they're prophets, but I think they're just really canny observers of the present, and are canny enough to be picking the DNA strands of the future that are here now, and saying, "Well, this is where we're probably going." It might be a warning. It might be a guide. I'm on the warning side of things normally, but that good science fiction writers can absolutely paint a vivid picture of a world that resonates in the mind.
Yeah, I think as a futurist, I love reading science fiction, and because it opens my mind as well, and it opens me, it gives me a different perspective of something that I might not have thought about before, especially if it's a bit longer term, like towards the end of the century, and then you can think back to today of how that would how that would might impact society, and I think that is really fascinating thing to do, to have that broader perspective and to see the world from in a new light. And I think organizations can benefit from that, because the organizations, especially the very large organizations, they are big mammoth ships. They take time to turn. So they need to know long before or where to go. And I think science fiction can sort of direct you of what might happen in the future. And then you can base your strategy upon that.
No, I mean, I agree completely. And I think, I mean, a great example is Kim Stanley Robinson, his book, The Ministry of the Future, I think it's called. Obama read that and recommended it to a bunch of people, and a lot of his ideas, which are very Kim Stanley Robinson, it looks at political solutions and policy solutions and tech solutions, and he's really, I think he's one of the more influential in that sense, of a very deep thinker who's can spread his mind across a whole range of issues around the environment. He does things like terraforming planets and all this sort of stuff, but the nature of the societies that will grow from it. So he's one example of a writer I think who's been quite influential on that point.
I want to shift gears a little bit. So in 36 Streets, you explore sort of this dense virtual reality landscape. And we already briefly mentioned the metaverse. Well, when is that going to happen? Obviously, in your world, this metaverse or mixed reality or augmented reality, however you want to call it, I think these are just semantics. It's just a digital layer on the physical world. How do you think? When do you think it will happen? And then how will, once we have this digital layer over the physical reality, how will that impact society? How will that impact organizations? How will it change things? Are we ending up in a Black Mirror episode? So what's going to happen?
VR is an interesting one, because VR has been hyped. It has cycles of hype that are going back 20, 30 years now, at least 20 years. And it never lives up to it. But VR is getting pretty good now. Augmented reality is a good one, because I think that will happen. It's a bit clunky. It's still clunky, but I don't know. Give it in my future, which is the year 2090 or 2100. Yeah, I mean, I think the kind of augmented reality where you put on some glasses and you can walk out the street and it has facial recognition and it sees your friends and it might prompt you about the last time you met. That might give you a thing that you might want to talk to them about if you're feeling lazy, like beep, and then it gives you lines to say, "Hey, George, how's the dog?" And it's just, that is very easy to imagine happening. So augmented reality.
Well, I'm not sure it's a good thing, but I agree. It's very easy to imagine, but I don't think it's a good thing. But that's a different story.
No, but I agree, and even augmented reality. I mean, it's a short story idea. Where a good short story idea where you just have someone who's deluded, who has a thing on, and they're walking around and everything's, what is it, the Stepford Wives or whatever that movie is, where everything is shiny and perfect, and then if they ever take the glasses off, or have you seen the movie They Live? It's a John Carpenter film. It's amazing. He puts on these sunglasses and you can see people who are aliens, and they have their billboards, instead of advertising, just says obey and consume, and they have money, and he looks at money and it says, "This is your God." But anyway, I've digressed. But that's easy to imagine. Fully simulated realities are I have in my book. That's an interesting one, because that's tougher. It's tougher to fool the mind, but I think people want to be fooled, and people love the idea. People fantasize about the idea of leaving their bodies behind. And going to a virtual world, and they want to leave their bodies behind for different reasons. But some of them, I suppose, are good if you're in a physical form. If you were quadriplegic, it's it would be an amazing thing to be going and you're running and you're swimming and you're doing all these other things. But I do feel like it's a form of. I think that if it happens in the future, it won't be used for that purpose. It'll be people visiting themselves in it, people living, and some of the work that I've done explores the connection between body and mind, and how much we need these bodies, how much of our spirit and our personality resides in our touch, taste, the scars we carry around with us.
But if you can mimic that, all of those senses in the digital world, which I wouldn't be surprised if at some point in the future we'll manage to do that. So like the holodeck, but then like next level holodeck. I'm sure people would love to leave their physical body behind and have the freedom of just, doing anything in the digital world. That seems to me, I wouldn't want that, but that's it's just one opinion, obviously. But it seems to me that whether it's good or bad, it will fundamentally change society. Society as we know it will no longer exist the moment we have that advanced augmented or virtual reality.
And who owns the space? And how much? You would be so knowable. Right now, we're still a black box at the center of who we are, that they will never quite figure out. They can manipulate us, but there's still a black box at the center of the human condition that no one really knows. But when you upload it all, and it has to be, the thing is, I guess it's a simulation. It's not an upload, is it? So we're talking about simulation. So you're still in your body. See, this is the thing. Uploads and simulations are two different things, because I can imagine, and I'm doing it right now, I'm writing a story right at the moment, which is about something called a sync suit, that you go into a suit, and then you go in a sphere that has all directional movement, and then but the twist is, inside the virtual reality, there's an augmented reality on top, and people are manipulating people inside. So I'm going down the rabbit hole.
Wow. Sounds a bit like Inception, the movie where you have a dream in a dream in a dream.
I'm imagining that in the terms of autonomous warfare. And how far, how far can you go with a fully autonomous army? And is it a war if there's only one sentient combatant and the other one has just been unleashed? And who unleashed it? And what military objectives can you take with just drones and various autonomous machines? And can you do it in a way where you'll never be sanctioned and never be blamed because you're all at arm's length? Yeah, you press a button, the machine runs. So I'm doing a lot of the things I mentioned. I'm exploring a lot of things that I've said that was part of my past, which is geopolitics and imperial ambition and use of tech, and imagining how far we can go with fully in autonomous warfare. But then also how much we can fool people through augmented reality as well. So it's a tricky one, though. It's a tough one to write. So it's only about halfway through, but I'm excited about where this one's going.
But it sounds very much exciting to read. So I'm looking forward to reading that one, because I think in my fourth book I wrote a short story, science fiction story, sort of as a way to help people understand what the metaverse is and where we're heading 10 years from now. And in my story, I had still augmented reality glasses that you put on, and it sort of creates an overlay of whatever is happening. But I think even that was quite short-sighted, because you can go so much further if you really take it next level. We can filter out people that we don't want to see, and that we can have full information about someone else's personality, about their non-verbal communications that we can't see, but an AI can easily see. So that will completely change everything. It will change. It will, and that's quite interesting to hear your thoughts on that, because you have explored this. It will change identity. It will change what it means to be human. And I believe in your book 36 Streets, you intertwine the idea of identity as well as memory, which I think in this case, if we have a digital reality in front of us, is what is reality, and so where do you see this happening? Where do you see this going? That our identity, what it means to be human, in the next couple of decades?
Well, it's a good question, and one of the things about cyberpunk is that it wants to see how extreme the changes that technology can wreak on a society and in the individual, and are we still human after all of it? That's the idea of cyborgs, for example. Cyborg is both a metaphor and a description. As a description, we're kind of cyborgs in a way, because a lot of us have fake hearts, pacemakers. Some of us might have cochlear implants in our brains, but we also have our phones, our exo memory. Exo memory used to be a book or a library. Sometimes memory can be contained in a city and architecture, but now we have all our human knowledge, not all of our human knowledge, but a lot of our human information that we carry around in our pocket. So we're cyborgs. So in a literal sense, but also as a metaphor, the cyborg metaphor is it's changing us. It's changing society. It's changing our brains. And one of the things I'm particularly interested in is memory, as you mentioned, because memory is everything we are. What are we without memory? Without our loves and our lusts and the traumatic events, but the glorious events that we had. Everything is memory in a way. But smartphones, for example, affect the way our memory works. Again, it's both a metaphor, but it's also literally what's happening. Literally, there's pretty good evidence to show about concentration spans, about recall, about the way we read books now, shortening. Pretty good studies now that are showing that our attention spans are shortening. But we need attention to remember. We need to hold something in our short-term memory for about 10 minutes, and then it goes into long-term memory. So it's something that I'm worried about is the effect on memory of having all these exo memories around us. And not, the brain is like a muscle in a way. We've got to exercise it.
It becomes lazy, the brain, if we don't use it.
It becomes lazy. So, but it's also a metaphor, and the metaphor of memory is the soul or the spirit. Because you're playing with the building blocks of what it means to be human. So I talk about memory editing and false memories, which are a sort of a common theme in cyberpunk. It leads to all sorts of fascinating storytelling situations, but also it's this symbol for our soul being played with, and how if our memories aren't our own, who are we? That's the situation that's the question posed in Ghost in the Shell, the 1995 anime. The main character, Majin Motoko, doesn't even know if she's got a cyborg body, but doesn't even know if her memories are her own. And if she ever leaves the police, her memories of everything she's done while she was with the police are theirs. They take the memories because it's their property. Is she still human? That's one of the questions. It's a very existential film as well as being an action-packed film. So I kind of went off on a tangent, but this is the cool thing about science fiction. It's someone like yourself who's a futurist. All the changes we talk about in science fiction are both metaphor and literal. They're really happening, but there's deeper things we're talking about as well, and it's usually about us and who we are. And so how far we can go, it's a fantastic question, and this is something that, really is, in your example, is one of the ways we can understand it really is only through fiction and film. Black Mirror explores it in a lot of them. You said one about deleting people we don't want to see. I think they have that in Black Mirror. There's an episode where a non-person gets blurred out and they can't interact with anyone. I think it's a former prisoner, and part of their penalty is I think they're blurred out and no one will they can't even speak. It's like they're trying to speak and it just comes through because it's muted. Which is extraordinary how invasive that is. But I've certainly had that in some of my works where certain words are censored by the government. And if you ever try to translate it, so someone tries to speak to you in another language and you have a translator in your head, but they're saying things that are censored, it gets bleeped out when they're trying to talk.
Well, if we're moving to brain-computer interfaces, which is sort of, the brain, our memories are sort of at the moment sort of the last domain that is, well, at least we believe, truly ours. But the moment we are hooking up our brain to the computer, to the internet, which is like it's already happening with Neuralink, but it's probably a matter of time before it becomes commonplace. And then that will go as well, and then so I consider myself as an optimistic dystopian. So I look at both the positive and the negative. It's a bit of an oxymoron, but it helps me sort of understand where we're heading. But if I think about those things and what we just discussed, my dystopic side really flares up. We already mentioned at the start of surveillance. Obviously, is good. 1984 is going to be like a child's book compared to what's going to happen. How do we go about that? How can we create a society where we don't end up in that extreme surveillance? And what role do organizations have to play?
Well, I mean that's a good question. That's the big question. I mean I can really only touch on it, but I would say this: I do, and I mentioned it before. I do often get a sense from some people, and it's sometimes people in business, and sometimes it's politicians, but sometimes it's just general people you're talking to, that everything's inevitable. It must be so. But this is not the hand of God. We still live in a democracy, and even people who don't can still change their government and change their society. People still, but if we're talking about the democratic part of it, at the moment we're still living in a democracy, and we can still make laws, and we don't have to let all this be so. It doesn't have to be. We can moderate the worst impacts, and that's at government really at its best. That's one of the things it should be doing. Moderate the worst impacts of. It might be the market, it might be technology, it might be an oligopoly or whatever it is, an oligarchy. It's moderating the worst parts of that. But then it becomes a question of policy, and these are complex issues. I do have in my work, one of the ideas I have is there's like a human quota in industries, and they have to have a human quota of workers. But that's in the book. It's described in my work. That's kind of it's crumbling all the time. The human quota is going down and down and down and down, and people are trying to maintain a certain amount of human workers in a particular industry. But Ursula, I quoted Ursula Le Guin before, but she gave this great speech a few years ago before she died, where she said something like, "Capitalism seems inevitable, but so did the divine right of kings." Now, I'm not saying overthrow capitalism, not quite, but I'm saying it's actually not that hard to imagine a different society, and writers do it all the time. And so all these things that seem inevitable right now, and I don't blame you, I'm the same. I feel I do, my dystopic mind takes over, but societies can change and people change it. If we forget that, that's the problem. And sometimes it feels like we're so divided and that we can't agree on anything, and we're so unable to communicate or compromise or show empathy towards our opponents. But that's how societies work.
But at the same time, I mean, you mentioned it before, is you have this big tech that sort of plays this role in society, and we see it happening in Australia at the moment, where Elon Musk is just ignoring what the Australian government says about removing the videos of the church stabbings. So big tech is so powerful nowadays and they have one objective function, and that's as much profit for the shareholder as possible, and they base all the decisions on that. if we extrapolate that, and we know that in a world where AI plays a big role, you need a lot of money to run AI, and if you have that money, then you can create AI, which will bring you more money. So you get this vicious circle of an ever smaller group of people running and controlling societies. How can we stop that? How can we? Yes, we have, as users, as consumers, we have we are in control, but we're also bloody lazy. I tried switching away from Facebook, which fortunately I left this a couple of years ago. But I tried switching away for example, from G Suite to a more privacy centric version called Proton, and it's very, very hard to do that because there's a reason why G Suite is so easy to use and so seamless. What can we do here? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, well, I mean, my thoughts are negative. So when I write about it, I am thinking about the endpoint, what you're talking about, that vicious cycle. What can we do? Well, there's the individual level, and there's the policy level, and then there's society. As individuals, I do think part of it is what you've just articulated, is opting out. It feels like I'm in a very difficult situation because I was never on any social media. I didn't even have a smartphone until the pandemic came. And then, you had to, because you had to bloody check in everywhere and it became impossible. So I got a smartphone quite recently because I try and minimize the amount of data that I can have. So if you minimize in a personal level the amount of information about yourself that's out there, then their data set is that just this tiny little bit smaller, all right? But the problem being a writer is you always have to engage with readers, and so it would be a foolish writer, especially someone like me who's early to mid-career, who would just go and live in the woods as a hermit, as much as I'd love to. But part of it is opting out, and part of it's being smart, and part of it's being informed, and all of these things on the personal level. But that only can take you so far. At some point, governments are so slow, and unfortunately, policies come in often too late. The big tech is very canny. They're donating a lot of money, and they're muddying the waters. But you fight. You could have legal fights, copyright for data sets for AI. That's a legal fight and a very winnable one. There's legislation, which is we've broken up monopolies in the past. We know it can be done. If you look at the cycle of history, once something gets too big, it's not healthy for a society. It's not healthy for an economy. It's not healthy for, do you really want to push it so hard that democracy doesn't work anymore and people are getting the pickaxes and smashing down, trying to smash their way into corporate headquarters? Because that's the end point. Unless they're planning a Brave New World type dystopia where we're all dulled and drugged by Soma with our phones and our distractions. Well, we're always a mix of Brave New World and 1984. Every society just has different policy levers. China goes more 1984. America does a lot more Brave New World. But it's all at different levels. But I think it's also raising awareness. Like, I don't think people are aware of how much of themselves they're giving away with all their social media. To just one example, I don't think we have this idea, and we have this. It's a small cultural thing where early on we decided it has to be free. The internet has to be free. Facebook has to be free. It's a good model. It's accessible, but we're paying for it in a different way. I'm at the point now where I would happily, if you told me $50 a year for Facebook and we'll never extract any data ever, and you'll never see an ad, I'll be like, yep, fine. I'll pay you. I will go on. If Elon Musk, he wants to change Twitter, he wants the worst of both worlds. He wants us to pay and feed his data sets and be manipulated. Like if we paid and they're all gone, all the bots were gone, all the data scraping was gone, and you pay $50, I'd probably pay it. But we don't have that. We have a mindset of things must be free, not knowing that the price we're paying is so huge. But that could be a company that chose a new way. But no company wants to. I don't know many that want to do it that way, but there's some out there. So it's all different levels. It's sorry, Mark, that I'm sort of meandering, but it's such a difficult question to answer because it's individual, cultural, legal, and social. I'll give you one more example of cultural change. In the writing community, am I allowed to swear on your podcast? We fucking hate AI. But there's a culture in the writing community where if you I'm helping the AI company steal your work and I'm getting paid, that person is gone. They're an outcast. There's a cultural expectation about it being an artist. So you have individual, cultural, legal, and social. And you can, and then take those 4 levels and then imagine the ways you can change them. I change on a personal level. You do too. From what you've been saying, I try to contribute to legal ways. I have in my contracts for my books, I say, no AI on covers. You can't use this book in any data set, blah, 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 blah. That's a legal way, a very small one. And then, I don't know. The problem is at some point you've got to rely on a legislator.
I want to see if we can end on a positive note. Let's try. We've talked about the different technologies that we're seeing coming, or you see coming in the next decades. Big tech's playing a role, but there's also the mom and pop shops. The very small entrepreneurs. How can they use science fiction? How can they use science fiction to help grow their business? What are your thoughts on that? And is there a positive way out where technology can help the smaller entrepreneurs sort of almost compete with the big tech? Do you see a way out there?
It's so hard because you have to think about all different industries and all different types of small business. But I would say, if I being a writer, you're running a small business, or a big business if you're George R. R. Martin, but most of us are running small businesses. And and I think the human dimension of connect, and this will be true of a lot of industries, the human dimension of, for example, a run of 500 books that are expensive. Now, I haven't done this, I'm not big enough, but there's some authors out there that might have a $50 book, right? But it's got illustrations and it's got signatures and it's a personal connection between you and the writer, the reader and the author. And when writers, and they can use technology like Kickstarters, they can use self-publishing in a way that is beneficial for themselves. And they can do it in a way that gets them that much closer to their audience. And you can do something we probably could never have done in, I don't know, even 10, 15, 20 years ago, is have this close human connection. You can't replace that with anything. No tech bro can come in and change and get something out of that. So what you are giving them is an experience, a human experience with an artist. This is just one example of of the industry that I'm working in. And a lot of writers are very canny about that and leveraging it. And it might be just newsletters and it's just this personal relationship, but again, it's facilitated by communication technology that's building little communities. And they might have 100 or 1,000 or 10,000, but when they have that, what feels like a close human relationship, they're readers for life. And they are loyal, and they'll buy all the swag and all the books. Now, I'm saying all this, and I don't bloody well do it myself. But But there's something called a hybrid career. Have you heard about this in publishing, where I'm a traditional published author? So my books are published by a UK, but it's published internationally. But I am going to, my next work is going to very likely be self-published, because I'm going to do exactly what I was just talking about. I'm going to try and get a closer bond connection with my readership for a work that I'm going to put out. It'll still be published everywhere as well, but that experience is from a business sense, if it works, can be very, very beneficial, but also from a relationship sense and a sense of building a hardcore readership. So that's, from a small business sense, the problem is you have to be very agile and very clued in, or you have to get someone to help you who's very agile and clued in, because there's ways to do it. But you keep having to be that old dog learning all these new tricks. That's publishing, you know.
Well, I think that's life. You know, we need to continuously adapt. But you know, I think that's a great ending. You know, that in the end, we still need that human connection. We still need that experience, that one-to-one experience, and technology can help there. But I think as long as technology doesn't take over, I think we still, also the smaller, you know, entrepreneurs will have a chance here if you can offer that human connection. And I think with that with the time is up. But thank you very much, Tim, for joining me on the show. I very much enjoyed the conversation.
Thank you. I probably got meandered a couple of times, but that was great. Thanks for having me on.
And that's it for today. As we wrap up today's enlightening discussion with T.R. Napper, we are reminded of the powerful role that science fiction plays in shaping our understanding of future technologies. Napper's insights, drawn from both his novels and extensive real-world experience, challenge us to consider not only the possibilities but also the responsibilities that come with technological advancement. This episode of Synthetic Minds has not just been a journey through the captivating narratives of cyberpunk fiction, but also a call to action for all of us in the business and tech communities. It urges us to use foresight and critical thinking as tools to navigate the complexities of the digital age. As we conclude this session of Synthetic Minds, we hope you leave inspired to think more critically about the technology you engage with daily. This episode isn't just a discussion, it's a call to integrate foresight and ethical consideration into our strategies and innovations. Make sure to subscribe and join us next time as we continue to decode the future with the help of visionary thinkers like Napper, helping you to prepare and adapt in an ever-evolving world and helping leaders like you envision and craft a future that is not only possible but also equitable and inclusive. Thank you.